57talk.com, broadcasting right here on the internet. And with me today, George the Animal Steele, Hall of Famer of the WWE. And this weekend, George, you're going to be the MC for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, an actual Hall of Fame, not connected to WWE.
Yeah, I'm in both Hall of Fames. I'm in the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame as well as the WWE Hall of Fame. I respect both of them very much. The difference is basically the WWE Hall of Fame is for people that performed there and took part in the WWE, and the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame goes all the way back to the great history of wrestling. When I say great history, some people laugh because we came out of the carnival era at the beginning, but we've progressed quite a ways. What's going on in the WWE, I call now, people ask me about it all the time, I call it the replacement of the circus, the greatest show on earth, which is kind of what we've become with that. I'm not a part of that anymore by choice, but I certainly am not knocking it in any way.
Okay, the website for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame is pwhf.org. And George, I went up to the site. They have a beautiful video. They actually have you've walked around. They have beautiful displays.
It's unbelievable. We're a real museum. We have we're bricks and mortar. We're the real deal, and that's what we intended to do when we started the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. It's a grassroots type program. It's great. It really is.
George, when did you disconnect from WWE? Because I remember you wrestled in 1998, and you were connected a little bit further. When did you kind of have a disconnect there?
I never really disconnected. It's just things changed. Basically, I found my faith with the Lord, and it didn't fit with what was going on in their storylines at the particular time, and we split ways. I'm not angry or anything. It's just that it didn't fit. Thank God their storylines have changed and they've softened a little bit in the last couple of years, which is a good thing. It should be family entertainment, I believe, and it's getting back to that era. There was a time when I didn't figure that it was.
George, you had been with them for so long. I was looking at some of the historic results from Madison Square Garden, and in 1970, you're appearing, your main event. How did it...
Actually, my first main event with the WWF at that time was in 1968 in Madison Square Gardens, Boston Gardens, all the major northeastern towns. Actually, I worked with the champion at the time, Bruno Sammartino, and I think we sold out every event that they had in the Northeast at that time. It was a bad guy, then it was fun.
Oh, sure. How did it feel to be in those dressing rooms in 1968 and yet still be in the dressing room in 1998, 30 years later, as a performer? Did you have to pinch yourself that you had made it all that way?
Well, yes. I had a very unique take on the business. I started in wrestling in 1961 with a mask on as a student, wrestling in the Michigan area. I was a school teacher, and it was a part-time job. And in all honesty, it remained a part-time job for me until 1986, because I taught school for 25 years, coached football and wrestling, and wrestled primarily in the Northeast. In the summertime, it was a much better job than driver's training. So I always kept it in the perspective as a part-time job. That's why my career lasted so long. I didn't get beat up as much as some of the guys. I also didn't buy into the character part of it. My real name is Jim Myers, and I was always really Jim Myers, playing the role in the character of George Steele.
Should I call you George or Jim? Doesn't matter.
You get confused with that one. I go as both.
Okay.
When we're doing wrestling interviews, I usually use the name George Steele, but I don't go into the George Steele character because it wouldn't be much of a, hey, you, yo, what type interview. It probably wouldn't work very well.
Yeah. George, in the 70s when I was growing up, I remember there was this rumor that you were the teacher in Michigan during the winter months.
Right.
And I could kind of believe it because it was so crazy. Maybe it could be true. But I remember you didn't come into WWF at the time just during June, July, or August. You'd come in before and then sometimes main event after. Is that correct?
Yeah. I just planned for the weekends for some of the bigger shows.
That always made me question the theory because I knew you weren't there in the winter, but you seemed to come before school was out.
I did, but I would come in. What was neat about that, we did TV shows in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and they did 3 shows on a Tuesday and then 3 more shows on a Wednesday. So I could skip school for 2 days and actually do 6 weeks of wrestling. So I'd be on TV way before I left school, you know, and then at the end I would fly back in on the weekends. I coached football, so Friday nights were busy, but I could fly in on a Saturday and do main events. And when I first went in, I did, you know, as crazy as I got later on, I did my own interviews early on, and I talked fairly intelligent. And as things went on, I became a little bit wilder and crazy. I didn't have a manager because at first we didn't realize that I was going to be coming back every summer, how I was going to get over, to be honest with you. And then they decided that they would put a manager with me so that they could speak for me when I wasn't available, which worked out great. I had great managers. I had the first one was Ernie Roth, who was the Grand Wizard of Wrestling. Then later on I had Lou Albano, and then back and forth with Lou Albano and Classy Freddie Blassie. And then there towards the end I had Fuji. And I started out with one of the greatest managers of all time, but not in the WWF, Gary Hart, who later on was great in the rest of the world, but he never came to the WWF. So I was blessed with great managers to talk for me when I wasn't available.
Now, I know you worked in Detroit with the Sheik, and you also, of course, very famous, most famous for the World Wrestling Federation. Did you ever think about going into any other territories, or were you all just booked up?
Well, I was a school teacher, so I wasn't available except for 2 months. And you know, they wanted me to come in Minnesota one time. I used to get calls from Vern Gagne, but in the Minnesota and that AWA, it took you at least 7 or 8 months to even get over. Well, I'd got over very quickly in New York, and that's where the big money was. I didn't see any sense in going anywhere else. And the same is true with the NWA. You know, I just had the perfect setup for New York. You know, the big arenas, the big territories, and so on worked out great for me.
Now, you didn't come in every summer. It seems to me that you'd come in one time and then maybe skip a year. How consistent was it?
I came in just about every 3 or 4 years, and then I would take a year off and go to Japan.
Okay.
And that was because we didn't want to wear it out, and we didn't want to be too obvious that it was just coming in the summertime. And so that worked out good, too, because I could go to Japan later on, a few other places, just smaller places, to take a break from New York.
Now, I've heard you speak out before about Bob Backlund. Superstar Billy Graham was the champion in '77, and I remember I lived in the East Coast. I thought he was fantastic. They brought Backlund in. What did you think of the switch?
Well, first of all, you got to go back a little bit sooner than that. Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales were baby faces, you know, people that were loved by the fans. And there was a real switch when they brought in a heel. And there was a lot of talk about it. And it was a risk because we couldn't afford to have the fans in the gardens. And I say gardens, I'm talking both Boston or New York, or Philadelphia, in those big, huge arenas, because we had the bigger arenas than most of the other territories. And we couldn't afford to have a riot in there because they would have killed the business. So it was really a risky thing. And Billy was a great choice because he had that arrogant look, but he didn't stir the crowd as much as you might say Kenny Patera, or even I'd be real humble myself. Or you know, we sometimes had really serious heat, and he always was just on the borderline of being a good guy because of his look, and he was an excellent interview. It was a great choice, but Vince, the reason it didn't last longer, Vince McMahon Sr. was scared to death of riots, and that's kind of why it ended as quickly as it did. He was a very charismatic guy. I'd say that he was about 20 years ahead of his time.
Yeah, well, I have the results here from May 16th, 1977. It was the first appearance by Superstar Billy Graham as the champion. He faced Gorilla Monsoon. You were actually in the main event that night against Bruno. Do you remember that night?
I don't really. I had so many of those.
Okay. But Billy had the great reaction in the Garden. I remember that clearly.
Yep.
Early on. But
it was a positive reaction.
It was. It really was. And now Backlund, as a fan, and you can share your opinion with me. You're the guest, but I thought that was a big letdown.
Well, let's talk about the champions now.
Okay.
And I have a different take on that than most people, most wrestlers probably. Champions are very important in the business, but they do not have to necessarily be the best entertainer. In other words, you put a belt on a guy that might not draw without it. To me, the greatest champion of all time was Bruno Sammartino, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Would Bruno Sammartino have been a superstar without the belt? I don't think so. I really don't. He needed the belt to be the champion, and that he needed that. Bobby Backlund was the same way. Billy Graham did not need a belt. He really didn't. Hulk Hogan is flamboyant as he was. Without the belt, he would have been flat. I don't think he would have been what he was without the belt. He needed the belt. A guy like Randy Savage really didn't. Real talented guys one of the greatest workers of all time in the WWF, and I'm going to say this, and you're going to laugh, but was Chief Jay Strongbow, way back when.
Well, I'm not going to laugh because when I was a kid, I thought he was great. And then when I got older, everyone said how he was a terrible worker. But he could really get the crowd into a match.
Absolutely. And he didn't need a belt to do that. He needed his character, Jay Strongbow.
And he could do a short 3-minute match, and it'd be not a riot, but people would be pretty darn excited.
They loved him.
Yeah.
They loved him. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And that's not a knock at anyone. Bobby Backlund, without the belt, might not have been on the card.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that thought went through my head a few times watching him.
But by the same token, he was on a lot of sellouts. Now, there's two reasons for that. One, he had, and again, it sounds egotistical, he had great heels to work with all the way through. He had a lot of really, good opposition. Plus, the cards were different then. When you go back to Bruno, Pedro, and even Billy, there might have been 7 matches, 6 matches. You only saw Andre occasionally in the Northeast because he was all over the world wrestling, although he was under contract to the WWF. When Bobby became champion, we had all of our superstars. We had maybe 12 matches. They were some of the best workers from around the world, coming and going all the time. So we fed them a lot of great talent. The reason that I was able to last so long, and this is very unique, is most guys would come in and they'd have I'm talking about the heels now, serious heels, would have a 7-month run, 8-month run, and they'd be in all the major towns, and after they'd work with, let's say, Bruno or Pedro or whoever, they'd work the first match in the Gardens, and they'd go to Boston, and then Philadelphia. Well, after they got done in the Gardens, they'd start losing to guys like Pusky, or Jay Strongbow and so on, but they were winning wherever they were being promoted all the way around the territory, and then they were gone. When I would come in, I'd basically wrestle the champion all across the territory because I was only there 2.5 months, make a ton of money, and be gone in 2.5 months. But no one's seen me really get beat by everybody else except the champion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it kept me very, very, very strong. But, I've heard people say, "Oh, you were great, you lasted a long time." There's more to it than that, believe me.
Yeah, well, Stan Hansen had a big run in New York in '76 when he broke Bruno's neck, and I remember as he was leaving, they made him do some jobs, and he was in the mid-level matches, and that was kind of how he didn't show up again for 3 or 4 years because it hurt you going out with losses versus victories.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and you get beat up, so you weren't really something they could sell for a while. And so by me just going in and getting beat by the champion is not a bad thing. And then coming back the next year and the next year and the next year. That's kind of how that worked.
George, which decade did you find the most enjoyable? The 70s, the 80s, or the 90s? You didn't wrestle that much, but obviously wrestling became just huge, bigger than anyone could ever imagine. Which decade did you really enjoy the most?
I loved being the heel. I loved coming and going early on. I loved the 60s and 70s. And then when Vince come in and we decided that we were going to change the character of George the Animal Steele a little bit and become a little bit more retarded, you might say, or challenged.
Comedy, yeah.
But yeah, I call it the cartoon George.
Yeah.
I didn't like that as much as far as working it was concerned. It took a lot of talent to do that. Again, that sounds egotistical, but for that to work like it did, if I might say so myself, it was a work of art. But by the same token, That's why I live in Cocoa Beach now. That's where I made my retirement.
Yeah.
And when Vince McMahon came in, he changed the business totally. I'm on Facebook quite a bit. I enjoy that.
Yes.
And I put a thing up there today, Vince singing a song way back when, Stand Back.
Oh, I've seen that.
And we had all the different characters from the WWF on there, and we were livid. He's killing the business. This damn kid is going to kill this business. When he first came on, working for his dad, he was the little guy, the kid. Here comes the kid. We treated him well, but sometimes we kicked him out of the dressing room. And later on, he became the super boss, and now he's what wrestling is.
Well, I'm sure you remember in the early 70s, he was a terrible commentator, and he actually had quite a learning curve. He didn't get the hang of it in like 2 or 3 weeks. It took a couple of years.
Well, he was following one of the best. That's the other part of it.
Cardell?
Bill Cardell.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. And when you follow a superstar, it's hard to perform at that level.
Would you ever have thought in the I know the answer to this, but would you ever have thought in the early 70s that Vince Jr. would have done what he did?
No. In fact, when he started doing it, I thought he was going to kill the business. The change in the business for me was Vashon's wedding. It was the biggest slapstick comedy I ever saw in my life.
I remember on USA Network, yes.
Exactly. And they flew me in. I was teaching at the time. They flew me in. We did this wedding thing where Moolah was giving away the bride and da-da-da, and it just went on and on and on. The midget was carrying the ring, and they tripped him, and Lou and Lassie fought over the ring. And then we went to the reception, and Vince brought in a bunch of booze and got everybody half drunk and had this crazy part. And it ended up in a squirting champagne all over the place, throwing cake at each other, and just a cake fight, a food fight. And I went up afterwards. I put my hand on his shoulder, and I looked at him in the eye because he had a lot of respect for me at that time. I looked him in the eye and said, "Son, you're not going to show this on TV, are you?" He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, you'll kill the business." He said, "Well, we'll find out." He put that cartoon, slapstick comedy, on USA 3 weeks in a row, and we went from number 18 to number 1 in cable television. So that tells you what I knew about entertainment.
Yeah.
He changed it totally.
Well, you know what's interesting, George, is that for 3 years he did a lot of that type of entertainment, and I remembered it, and it was great. Wrestling had always been so stodgy, and it was great, but it was kind of stale, and he took it and did this, but then he didn't continue with that. I mean, it's not like he does that today.
No.
He dropped it somewhere along the line and, went in all different directions. He has a great ability to change with the times.
Well, what he did was he brought in the best talent around the world into his camp. And in that period of time that you're talking about, when it was so good, your grandmother could have booked it. There was so much talent there, you couldn't make a mistake. But he just he had this vision of wrestling as an entertainment, and we, the rest of us, had this vision of wrestling as a sport. We knew what it was in the ring, but we sold it as a real deal, and it didn't rub well with a lot of us at that time. I call it now as the ring turns.
Yeah.
Kind of like a soap opera. And he was right on the money, and we were wrong. I mean, we really were.
George, do you think it was the unique way he presented the talent, or just the fact that almost every week there was a new superstar coming in from a different part of the country? There were so many new faces being brought in that it was like a tidal wave.
That's part of it, but what made all that work, if we forget one thing, was Tuesday Night Titans. That show that we had, that's where he sold his talent, and you learned their character and what they were all about. You didn't learn about them in the ring.
I love Tuesday Night Titans, and
it was a great show.
But why did Vince drop it? Did he drop it because people didn't like it? He wanted to go another direction?
He'd exposed everybody that he could as far as he could go without really going over the top. And it was just time to turn. So that's how the cartoon George got over, was on that Tuesday Night Titans. That's how one of the craziest things was Adrian Adonis coming out of the closet, so to say. I mean, he wasn't gay, but that was the craziest. Adrian told me before that happened. He says, "George, watch me tonight. You're not going to believe what you see." and he pulled that stunt. It was like, I mean, it was like crazy, but it got over.
I thought that was something else. It didn't last though. Was it because of the weight gain, or he?
It was his look, and it did last until he got carried over. You know, the demons got into him, and he got to where he wasn't showing up, and so on and so forth. And they put him down the road. But in the ring, he was, even with the gay character, the fat look, and the bad body, he was one of the greatest guys to work with. He had a wrestling mind that was unbelievable.
Yeah, he could really wrestle. Go ahead.
One of the things that we did one night, I was working with Adrian. I think it was in the Gardens. I'm not sure. And we wanted to get Adrian was going to work with Hulk. It was in Philadelphia, and we wanted to get him over, but they didn't want to beat me. George always, you know, as a cartoon, I very rarely ever lost. I usually got beat on a disqualification. I'd do something crazy and they'd disqualify me. Then people would feel sorry for me because I felt like I got cheated.
Yeah.
Anyhow, with him, I was into that thing with Elizabeth and Randy big time.
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure out a way to get me, to beat me without hurting me. And what happened is I was coming down the aisle. They had a guy hold one of those large posters of Elizabeth, and I really sold it. Like, I put my head on it, like, and then we went in the ring, and I was beating the tar out of him. And this was all his idea. I was beating the tar out of him, just murdering him. And he rolled out of the ring and come back in with the poster of Elizabeth, and I just, you know, got schmitten over it. And he took it and started tearing it in pieces. And I was kind of like standing like I'm crying. And then he threw it on the mat. I dropped down like a puzzle and started putting it together again. He got up on the top rope, jumped off, hit me in the head with his knee. I turned over. He covered me 1, 2, 3. And I turned back over and started putting Elizabeth back together again with the puzzle. Like it didn't matter to me, and it didn't hurt me at all. We got out of the match, and he sold out with the Hulk the following show.
Yeah, there really was a skill to George Steele too. The more comedic version.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of people lose sight of, you know, everybody. One of the key factors of being a superstar in wrestling is you're able to talk on the interviews. And when Vince, I did my own interviews, and I did good interviews until one day Vince said, "You're making too much sense for an animal," and he said, "Why don't we? I want something else," and it kind of irritated me. So we were going to do a retake, which I never did retakes. He says, "Do it again, but don't make so much sense." And he stuck the mic in front of my mouth, and I went, "You." He said, "That's what I wanted." I went, "Oh, nuts."
Yeah.
That's not what I wanted to be. But what I learned to do, and this is what people didn't realize, I could say 3 or 4 words in a minute and a half and really get an interview over. And the way that it was done, I like to use One Man Gang as an example. If you remember him,
yes,
he had a tattoo on both sides of his head with a mohawk haircut in the middle, and he's a big biker and so on.
Sure.
My interview with him, one of the interviews was, I'm not going to take 2 minutes to do it. We don't have much time. But it was like, tattoo! And it's pointing to my head. And then, biker, and break arm, and show him the hammerlock like he's going to beat him in the hammerlock. Then the clincher, and people are trying to help me say words because I'm struggling with it. And I had wrestlers at home say, "You know, my family sits there and tries to help you say your words," which is great because they're getting the message that I'm trying to give out. And the last thing I said about the One Man Gang was tricycle. Well, now you envision this great big guy with a mohawk haircut with a tattoo on the side of his head riding a tricycle, and in the process getting beat up by George. So it was like 3 or 4 words, but there was a picture to it, a visual picture. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think it's just amazing what you did over such a long period of time as a quote-unquote gimmick wrestler and keeping it fresh and keeping it hot and changing things. Of course, the big change in 1984. And I thought when I saw you in the ring in 1998, obviously you were older, but you could still pull it off.
Well, you know, there's a difference. You use the word that a lot of young guys use today, and the word gimmick. And the gimmick in the character is a totally different thing. The gimmick was something I wore in my pants and my foreign object that I hit somebody in the throat with.
Okay.
Character is something that I was structuring all the time. And the reason that I took it from one way to the other, prior to Vince saying you're making too much sense for an animal, I was doing a schizo thing at that time. I'd do a great interview, then all of a sudden go off the wall and bite your tie. But the reason for that was coming back all the time. I had to adjust. I had to. If I'd have done the same thing for 30 years, it would have been pretty redundant. So every time I'd come back in, every summer there would be something different, something totally different.
The green tongue, for example.
That happened by accident. That was no one sit down and said, "Okay, George is going to have a green tongue." I had a couple drinks. It happened in Pittsburgh. Everything seemed to happen in Pittsburgh, and I had a couple drinks, and I put a Chlorets in my mouth and went on live TV. And my tongue come out. It was green. The place went nuts, and the switchboard went nuts. The following Friday, I was in a main event in Pittsburgh, and there was these posters of green tongues all over the place, which I laughed at. I didn't do it again for another 2 or 3 months. And I threw a couple more Chlorets in my mouth. I thought to myself, I'm going to do that green tongue thing again for my own laughs. And it happened again. After that, I decided, well, I'll have the best breath in wrestling. And it's what I'm remembering. I mean, there's a lot of better wrestlers than me. Believe me, I was not at the top of the.
And the eating the turnbuckles. I mean, you came up with a lot of things.
Oh, that happened by accident. Yeah. Honestly, we were in Pittsburgh again, and this is black and white TV. This is going back to 62 or 63, somewhere around there, maybe 64, and no, 67 is when it was. And they used to give away gifts to come to studio wrestling. We have about 300 people come in the studio. And we had a black and white. We had black plywood with white faces planted on behind the people that were moving to make it look like a bigger crowd. And they gave away a gimmick, every Saturday to get people to come. This particular Saturday, they gave away pillows. There was little satin couch pillows, and they had about 300 of them in there. And this lady at ringside threw one at me. I got a pillow in the ring. What am I going to do with it? If I sit down, it's boring. If I throw it back, there's going to be 300 more flying at me. So I took it and I bit it. This little pillow was packed so tight with this padded stuffing that it kind of exploded. Do you remember those little satin pillows?
Yes.
Okay, when it exploded, I reached in and started throwing it left and right and up in the air. And it was so light, it come down like snow, and it stuck in my hair like the abominable snowman. And then I took the pillow, great TV, and put it over my opponent's head and started choking him. The place was going nuts. When I ripped it off, he was blue. Almost killed him. The stuffing in the pillow was lighter than air, so I had it over his head, and every time he breathed, the stuff went down his lungs. And I didn't know that, so I'm just doing good TV. When I pulled it off, he was blue. I go to the dressing room, and the wrestlers, being wrestlers, were all laughing. They said, "George, you almost killed him." And they thought that was funny. And one of the guys, Tony Puglisi, said, "Yeah, if you could eat a turnbuckle, that might, you might be able to do that every show. It'd be great." About 2 weeks later, I was wrestling with Strongbow, and the match just was not getting over. So I looked at the turnbuckle. I went over to the old Everlast turnbuckle. I took a bite out of it. It ripped very easy. I stuffed that in his face, and we had a riot, and the place got excited. So I'm remembered for 2 things: a green tongue and eating turnbuckle.
Yeah, there was just some magic about that turnbuckle when you'd go for it. It was just
the way I sold it, I'd pat it and yell, "Eat!" And the crowd would all eat. They wanted to see me eat it. Later on, to bring kids in the ring and let them try to eat it, and so on and so forth. It was, it became from wrestling to entertainment, which is what Vince calls it now.
George, you became a movie star, Ed Wood.
Exactly.
One of the most beautifully made movies of all time. Every scene just so well done.
Tim Burton is a talent, isn't he?
It was just amazing. That must have been an incredible honor.
It was great. It was fun. It absolutely. You know how I got that part? That's funny. That's another funny story. They were looking all over for somebody to play Tor Johnson, and Tim didn't know if he wanted to use an actor with a lot of makeup or a wrestler or what. And every time he went for the look, my name came up because I looked a lot like Tor Johnson. So he calls me up and he says, "George, I'm thinking about using you in a movie. I need to talk to you. You look like a movie star." So I kind of got that look, movie star. And then I researched the part after I got it, and I found out that Tor Johnson was the first guy to do monster movies without makeup. So yeah, I look like a movie
nice
star,
compliment,
right.
yeah.
So that's how that's. But that was fun. That was a great experience.
What did it feel like seeing yourself on the big screen when you went to the? Did you go to the preview?
Oh yeah, we went to the premiere was there in New York, and where was it? The something center, the Lincoln Center, and that was a great experience. All the that group of actors bonded in such a funny way. Usually, when you do a premiere, it's done for the media, and everybody's sucking up to the media for the next show and all that stuff. Our premiere the party was more like a family wedding. We just danced and raised heck, and everybody really liked each other. It was a real bonded group of people. It was fun.
Beautiful movie. Have you done any other movies or TV besides that?
I've done something. A few. I had 3 or 4 parts in smaller movies. Had a couple of independents that really didn't get distributed that I thought were pretty good, really. It's called Blowfish. I think you can find that on the internet. I'd like to invite people to go to my website. I think I've got a great website.
Excellent.
That explains a lot of my life, where I'm at in different forms of my life and how I got there. My learning disability as a kid, a master's degree now. I mean, He's been playing a role in my life my whole life. I just didn't know it.
Well, you've had a life like no one else. Your website is www.georgesteele. It's an E at the end of the L, right?
Right.
STEELE.com. It's an excellent website, George. I've looked at it, over time, and it's very nicely done. And I'd just like to congratulate you on a wonderful career. And who knows what you could do next? You never know.
You never know, do you?
You never know.
You got this thing that, I don't know if you've seen it or not, it's out there now. We got some people looking at it. It's called Something Fishy with Greg Valentine and I putting our money together. It's set up to be a sitcom down the road if anybody buys it. We bought a fishing camp, and neither one of us know anything about it. And it's kind of a cute thing. We've got 30 minutes in the can.
Wait, did you actually buy the camp?
No.
Okay.
No. It's just a.
Okay, part of the show. Okay.
Yeah, but it's kind of a fun thing. I think you can find that on YouTube. Something Fishy, not something, but something with just no G on the end of something, and -fishy.com. I think it's under George Steele and Something Fishy, and we've taken it down off the web. We had it on the web. There's a thing called Crackle. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but a lot of the shows that are picked up for TV do short little runs for Crackle, and we're planning on going on there.
Well, George, like I said, I'd just like to thank you for giving us a lifetime of entertainment, and like I said, we'll be excited to see what you pull off next. You never know. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the time, and God bless.
Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.